teach you that kind of thing. Boom. All right, everybody, welcome to Screenwriting Deconstructed 3, Creating Compelling Characters. Just a quick advertisement for me. My name is Rich Baker. I'm a private coach. That's what I do for a living. I coach improvisers, actors, all kinds of different things, specifically screenwriters. I like to help writers ideate, motivate, and elevate. So if you have a script that you want feedback on, I give a lot of detailed, thoughtful feedback, and I also help coach people, whether they're like stuck in an idea, they just need some motivation, they just generally just want some help. I'm available for all that at Rich Baker Coaching on Facebook, or you can email me, therich.baker@gmail.com. Okay, so what we're going to be diving into today, just the overview. First part's going to be all about characters and stories. I'm going to go ahead and mute, getting a little extra noise here. John, I think I'm going to go ahead and mute you for now. Cool?
Awesome. Oh, yeah, let me mute.
All right, so we're going to dive into the relationship between characters and story. Different types of characters as far as different roles that happen in the film. What makes a character engaging, just different aspects of that. We're going to deep dive into heroes, talk a little bit about villains, and then we'll go, almost all my examples are going to be film examples, but then we'll dive into the difference between TV characters and film characters, for those of you that are more interested in the TV side. And then Q&A, so if you have any questions that you brought in of like, I wanted to know this, feel free to ask them then, or if any questions come up, we'll have at least 15 minutes for questions. We'll go about an hour, maybe even a little less, no more than an hour tops. All right, let's start with characters and story, right? So I think a lot of us think that characters and story are, we think of them as two very different things. What's the story of your screenplay? What are the characters? But in a way that I think is very helpful for us as writers, we want to think about them as the same thing, right? The characters are, the amalgam of what your characters do is the story, and the story is the sum of your characters. That may sound just like a fun little word salad there, but the point is that, well, we'll get to a second, but the idea is that if we think about them as separate things, I think it does us more harm than good as writers, okay? I like to think of them as inseparable, and I like cute puppies. So, yeah, right? That's what I was going for, was just to get a, because that's what I did when I first saw the photo. So the reason why this is important is because when you think about story, I think I used to think this way, and I've coached a lot of writers who do, is that your story is one thing and that your characters are other, and you kind of like fill in the characters into the story. And what I have discovered over the last few years is that that way of writing has really gotten in the way for me and for a lot of other people, because whenever you change anything about a character, their motivation, something, an attribute about them, anything like that, then it's got a ripple effect through the whole story. Or if you try and change a plot point for the story, it's going to have a ripple effect of how it's going to change the characters. So think of them as one continuous narrative is what has helped me to really think about it as your screenplay is this one entity that is the characters and the story together. So basically, a really fine point of way of saying this is that the character arc goes in lockstep with your story structure. So most screenplays have a basic 3-act structure. You can get fancy and go off that if you want, but a lot of them have that 3-act structure, and you can tell when an act ends and when an act begins based on what's the main character learning, what are they going through, what's their goal, that kind of thing, right? So if you haven't read Robert McKee's story, it is one of several books that I think most people who write screenplays would tell you is pretty crucial. It's a big, thick book, and I slogged my way through it, not because it's full of good stuff. I'm not necessarily recommending you read it, but being familiar with it certainly helpful. And here's a quote from it that I think is going to illustrate this point. We cannot ask which is more important, structure or characters, because structure is characters, character is structure. They're the same thing, and therefore one cannot be more important than the other, right? So here's another different book, which I also recommend, Michael Haig, the Writing Screenplays That Sell, says the 3 acts of the story correspond to the 3 stages of the hero's outer motivation. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Each change in the hero's motivation signals the arrival of the next act, right? So what is motivating your characters to do what they do has a lot to do with what act part of your screenplay that you're in. Okie dokie. So let's talk about different types of characters. In an hour-long class, we could go into a ton of detail on all kinds of different characters, but we're mainly going to deal with, first of all, heroes. Heroes are the most crucial part of any story. We'll go a deep dive into those, but you know what a hero is. It's the main person in the story that you care about. Now, some stories have multiple heroes. Like Game of Thrones is easily, Daenerys Targaryen is clearly a hero in, as well as Jon Snow, as well as Ned Stark, as well as so many others. So you can have more than one hero, but you need to have at least one hero. No story can go without that. Villains, of course, we all love a good villain is absolutely memorable. There's 3 that very memorable for me. Apologies for the all male nerdy hyperfan kind of movies, but these are ones we're pretty familiar with: The Incredibles, Star Wars, and the Dark Knight series. Villains, we're going to talk about that. You don't absolutely have to have a villain in a story, but if you're going to have a villain in a story, the writing that villain character needs to be, they need to be compelling in a particular kind of way, or else they're going to feel very cheesy or one note. Other types of characters, and we're not going to deep dive into this today, just wanted to throw these out there. Sidekicks, again, not necessary for every screenplay, however, can be very helpful. And, as you can see in these 3 examples, Donkey from Shrek, Dory from Finding Nemo, or Samwise Gamgee from Lord of the Rings, in, big parts of those stories, and a lot of the memorable parts of those stories come from the sidekicks. The sidekicks can be a real nice foil for the hero, and can obviously provide a lot of comic relief and a lot of other motivations there. Mentors, again, not necessary for stories, but boy, howdy, can they really help you out. Yoda is, one of the most memorable characters in all of Star Wars, and he plays the mentor role. Obviously, Pat Morita's character in The Karate Kid as well, and that's Haymitch there on the top from the Hunger Games. So mentors, just generally the person who helps guide the hero, often isn't listened to until it's too late, but then their advice winds up coming back and help them out. So we could go into a lot more details on other types of characters, but those are just 4 of the big types, and we're only going to deep dive into 2 of them. But in general, what makes a character engaging? Any character. A lot of these, we're going to talk about heroes specifically, but what makes a character, what makes us as an audience care? What is the thing about them that makes us want to watch? So here are some attributes that you can give any character that makes them more interesting. 1, high stakes, right? So what is the fate that this character, when they make a decision, when they do an action, what are the stakes? Often in superhero movies, it's the fate of the world or something equivalent of that. It doesn't have to be that big by any stretch. It could be something smaller, but something that we care about. So in Happy Gilmore, for example, Adam Sandler's character is trying to save his grandmother's house. And even though that might seem small stakes compared to the saving the whole world, we get to know the grandmother, we get to know the relationship between the character and the grandmother, and therefore, because we care about them, the stakes seem very high. This little old lady being homeless versus saving the house that her husband built before he died, right? Secrets, what is it about this character that we don't know yet that's intriguing us? What is the question that's on our minds that we're like, oh, we got to answer this, right? If you remember the Howard Stern movie, if you ever saw it, called Private Parts back in the late 90s, one of the things they said, and this is actually a true thing, is based on the real Howard Stern, they said, why are people listening to him? And the survey said, most people listen to Howard Stern because they want to know what he'll say next. Because it's always like, what is this guy going to say? What is the, what's compelling about it? So it's either a secret that's overt, like, oh, there's something here that we don't know, a mystery person, a mystery part of their relationship, what they're doing, something like that. A great example of this was Lost. In Lost, every character, and there was tons of them, and they all had secrets, and that was the whole function of the narrative was to show their backstory and what their secret was and how they got on this flight and how they wound up here and this part of their life. So, you know, you just want to know more, right? Impressive abilities. You know, the first time that you saw Darth Vader force choke a guy from 10 feet away, you're like, whoa, that's pretty impressive. You know, or in any time a character does something that is like cool or cunning, outsmarting someone, doing a feat, you know, physical feats, anything that just makes us go, wow, that's really cool. We tend to want to be on them. Likewise, the coolness factor there, you know, and coolness factor is very relative, right? So you might think, oh, Darth Vader is cool because he's got like this all black, sleek, you know, very mechanical looks, that deep voice. That's cool to a lot of people. My mother could care less, right? What does she find cool? Characters in Downton Abbey, you know, different things like that, how to get away with murder. So what is cool depends on the audience that you're going for. Relatability just means what is something about this character that your audience can relate to, right? So a lot of movies and TV shows throughout history have been about nerdy, shy, quiet guys who can't do anything right, can't get the girl. That's because a lot of Hollywood screenwriters were nerdy, shy, quiet guys who couldn't get the girl. So they clearly could relate to that. And then a lot of dudes out there and could relate to that too. That's why a lot of movies out there were predominantly aiming for the male market for so long, and thankfully we've gone beyond that. But what is relatable about this, right? Something that they that about them that you can go, oh, I can see that in me. I can see that point where they really were trying to do something and they just couldn't get it done, and I've been there, you know. So what can I relate to? What do they love? What do they want? All right. So again, going back to Happy Gilmore, he loves his grandmother, and that love, like, because he loves his grandmother, we love him, right? What do they want, right? In Zootopia, Judy Hopps wants to be a cop. She wants to be a police officer more than anything else, and because she wants that so bad, we want her to have that. And then lastly, acts of kindness. What is something that they're doing, that they've done in your story that makes us go, oh, right? So if they ever read the book Save the Cat, another in the pantheon of great books on screenwriting, one of the things to talk about is if you have your character save a cat in the beginning, then all of a sudden we care about them, right? Of course, there's plenty of examples of other than that, but what is it that makes us go, oh, this is a good person, or animal, or whatever your character is? All right, so those are ways to make a character someone that we're gonna be a little bit more engaged with. So let's talk about heroes, the most important part of any story. Every single story has a hero. You cannot have a story that is in any way compelling without a hero. It's integral, right? So here's an example of a story without a hero. The wind blew past the trees. The moon was high in the air. It was cold. This is a story. This is a series of events. We don't care because all it is right now is background, right? Who's in these woods? What are they trying to accomplish? Then there's a story. If there's not, it's just a sequence of events. Okie dokie. This I found super helpful. There's a book out there called Creating Character Arcs by author K.M. Weiland, and she breaks down 4 components that are necessary for any hero. And maybe necessary isn't... maybe you get away with 1 or 2 of these, but let's say most heroes have these 4 things: the lie, the ghost, the want, and the need. You're probably familiar with wants and needs, but we'll go into that too. The lie and ghost, they're things that before I read this book, I wasn't familiar with at all, or at least I didn't give terms for them, and they've wound up being really helpful. So let's break them down. First I'm going to do is I'm going to define all of them, and then I'm going to go through a movie with this and specific examples for all of them. So the lie is basically the incorrect thing that the hero believes that motivates them to do to do certain things, to mess certain things up. This is and by lie, it may not be like a willful, someone told them something inaccurate, but it might just be something that they believe for whatever reason that is not helpful to them. The ghost is the damage that was done to that character, whatever that character experienced, that gave birth to the lie. So what happened to them that made them believe this thing that's not helpful? again, I'll go examples of these in a little bit. The want, that's probably pretty obvious, but it's the external goal the character thinks they want. So if you're a beginning screenwriter, you probably know that your main character needs to want something, right? So I want to return home to Kansas, so I've got to see the wizard, right? That's her external want. She's trying to get out of Oz, go back home. And then the need is what the character doesn't know they want or doesn't think they want, but actually it's what they need in order to achieve the goal that they're trying to get. This is also known as the character arc. So where's your character begin in the beginning, and how do they wind up changing in a way that they didn't know they needed to change by the end? So I'm going to take a movie from my childhood that I love to go through this. Cool Runnings. If you haven't seen it, it's hilarious and awesome and uplifting and really fun. And one of John Candy's last roles, and he knocks it out of the park. It's a movie, actually, it's based on a true story, which, just sidebar, if you're ever writing a script based on a true story, know that the based on can be as liberal as you want it to be. My friend is a screenwriter who actually won an award for the movie Black Klansman. And if you haven't seen it, it's based on a true story. And the guy who lived it, he's still alive, that it's based on, he was like, oh, it's a good movie, but, it's a movie, right? You can't take any offense to it not being exactly real life, because real life isn't as compelling as the movies, or at least you've got to package it in a different way. So anyway, this movie, we're going to go through the lie. So the main character's name is Derice. He is a sprinter in Jamaica who... what he believes, the lie that he believes, is that he's a nobody and that getting a gold medal will make him feel like a somebody, right? His dad was an Olympic athlete. He comes from Jamaica, which, they stress is this little island that no one thinks about. And this is back in the 80s when it actually took place. So they really like, no one cares about us. We're just this little island. And he believes that in order to actually be someone, he's got to win that gold medal. Cool. So the ghost that haunts him, and oftentimes you'll see this happen in the movie itself. Sometimes you'll see flashbacks to it or references to it. But in this movie, as typical most movies, you actually see it happen near the beginning. So what happens is he's trying to qualify for the Olympics in sprinting, in the 100-meter dash, and someone next to him winds up tripping, falls, and it trips him. So he's all poised to just run the 100-yard dash and win. He's the fastest guy in Jamaica. And through no fault of his own, something happens that stops him from getting into the Olympics the way he wants. So now his want's still the same. He still wants a gold medal in the Olympics. So he changes tactics. Instead of being a sprinter, he's going to start the first Jamaican bobsled team on an island with no snow. Hence, comedy. And what he needs to do, and what he winds up doing by the end of the movie, is he needs to accept that his choices dictate who he is. His character is about what he does, not about anything external being accepted by the Olympic Committee or by other Olympians or by getting that gold medal. It's about the choices he makes. It's about that he is enough on his own without needing it. And the movie, like most movies or TV shows, they spell this out without any... with total clarity here, because John Candy's character, about 3/4 away through the movie, is having a conversation with the main character, Derice, and he says specifically, it's a quote from the movie, "A gold medal is a wonderful thing, but if you're not enough with it, you'll never be enough without it." And that is the main crux of the movie. Often screenplay writers put it in the dialogue or somewhere in the movie like that, and there it is for that movie. So that's his need. And that's what he winds up. That's what's so satisfying about the end of that movie, because he does not win a gold medal. Spoiler alert for a movie that came out in 1992. He does not win a gold medal. However, he does realize that he is worthwhile. Jamaica is not just some insignificant little place, and he's not some insignificant person. And the lack of a gold medal does not affect that in any way. So let's talk about another hero. This one you've probably almost certainly seen. If you haven't, very ubiquitous movie around the holidays. Home Alone, our hero, Kevin McAllister. So let's break down what is about Kevin McAllister that makes him a compelling hero. He's the underdog, right? So underdogs automatically, anyone who's got to rise up in order to accomplish their thing, it's so easy for people to love the underdog. he gets picked on. At the beginning of the movie, he gets yelled at. He's treated unjustly and unfairly by his family, of all people, in the beginning of the movie. So he's part of this huge family, and he's not only not taken seriously, he can't get the type of pizza he wants. Like, he has to sleep in the attic for the night. Like, he's just, right away, people are just hammering on this kid. And so it makes us feel like, hey, can't do that. Like, and we want to root for him. He says something he regrets. He says, I wish my whole family disappears. And we've all said something that we can regret. So we can definitely, especially as children. So that's something a lot of people can identify with. Then he starts to have fun in the movie. Once he realizes he's alone, he goes nuts. He's dancing, he's shaving, he's going to the grocery store, and he's having a ball. And like, we, especially as adults, can look at that movie and go, oh, what would it have been like to have been a kid in a huge house by yourself with access to money and all that kind of stuff. And it's funny. He's cocky, kind of, in a way that works. The cockiness is one of those traits that if you can play it right, your character's very likable. And if you do it too much, your character is a douchebag. Kevin McAllister pretty much comes off as a good guy, as far as I can tell, and not a douchebag. He cares for other people. So if you remember the character, the old man with the shovel who's shoveling the snow, is really scary at first. Like, he winds up helping him and talking to him and giving him advice about, you should just talk to your daughter that you haven't talked to in 20 years, that kind of thing. So he does things for other people that makes us go, oh, right? That's like his save the cat kind of thing. His adversaries are bigger than he is, right? So his adversaries are two grown men who are, even though they're fairly incompetent, they're experienced criminals, they're grown men, and he is a little boy on his own. So he's facing big odds. And then by the end, he learns responsibility. He starts out as this kid who's not responsible at all, who doesn't take any responsibility for himself. And by the end, not only can he take care of himself, but he can also defend his home against two would-be attackers. So we love, that's the anatomy of Kevin McAllister, and reasons why we like him as a hero, why we like his journey. Another hero that I mentioned earlier is in one of made my favorite movie of all time, are definitely up there. Officer Judy Hopps from Zootopia. What do we love about her? She believes anyone can be anything. That is her belief. She states it right in the beginning of the movie, where anyone, if I just get to Zootopia, anyone can be anything, and all the problems will be solved. That's what she believes, which is actually the lie that she believes, but it sounds nice, and so we relate to that. Like, yeah, idealism, we love it. She wants something so badly. She wants to be a cop. And if you haven't seen the movie, the world is, all mammals are just basically humans, and there's never been a bunny cop before, right? So it's part, play on like women's rights or racism, different things of like, oh, this type of thing, this bunny, nobody's ever done this. She's going to be the first one, and she wants it so badly. She disregards the naysayers. So in the beginning, one of the first scenes of the movie, she's talking with her parents, and her parents are trying to talk her out of going to Zootopia, out of trying to be a cop, because they want her to stay safe and be at home and be a carrot farmer like they are, and her 100 or so brothers, however many she has, because they're bunnies. Funny. And the whole time, she just like, they're like, well, Bunny's never been a cop before. And she's like, well, I guess I'll be the first one. It's like, it doesn't faze her at all. And there's something about that that's just like, we love it. We're like, yeah. Don't let them get in your way. You got this, Officer Hopps. Unbridled determination. She gets obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, and she just keeps figuring out ways around it. There's a beautiful training montage where she's going through the police academy, and it's like, how is she going to scale this wall? How is she going to fight this rhinoceros in a boxing ring? And she figures out ways to do them, and we just like, yeah, get it, girl. She helps others. She's very helpful for other people, and she a character, it picks on some of her friends, and she defends them, even though she gets a scar for it. She winds up helping a guy who winds up screwing her over, which is how the whole thing starts with her and the Fox character. So let's see what else. She's impressive, just as what she does. She's like keeps impressing us with how she finds ways around things. She gets hurt. There's times where she's just at her wit's end. We can relate to that. She learns from her mistakes. She'll do something, she'll fall into a hole, and then she'll wind up being the smarter for it the next time. And then she makes the hard choice. So again, spoiler alert, sorry, at the near a little bit past the halfway point, the thing she's wanted the most, to be a cop, she winds up putting her badge on the desk and giving up, because she thinks that it's the better choice, because she feels like she did more damage as a cop than she did help, and her whole goal was to help people. And that hard choice, it's super hard, and we just love her for it. Okay, so let's talk about villains a little bit. Villains they can be awesome. You know, as an actor, I think, and I'm sure any other actors can relate, sometimes playing the villain is way more fun than playing the hero, whether it's, you know, movie, sketch, TV show, whatever. Here's some 3 iconic villains: Hans Gruber from Die Hard, Ursula from The Little Mermaid, and of course, the infamous snapper Thanos from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So here's the thing: not every movie needs a villain. Here's just 3 examples. Forrest Gump, no real villain in Forrest Gump. While You Were Sleeping, same thing. And Moana is one of those. I've had a couple discussions with this. Some people think, oh, Nafiti is the villain, or it's Tamatoa, the crab who sings Shiny. But really, if you look at the screenplay, those are all obstacles, because none of the villains like stick with her the whole story. They're not the antithesis of the character. They're obstacles that she has to. Moana is really a coming of age story, where, you know, and there's plenty of enemies that she has to get past, but no real villain in the whole thing. So I'm just pointing this out there, that if you write a story without a villain, that doesn't necessarily mean that your story's incomplete. Some stories just don't have villains. But if you are going to write a story with villains, here's some things that can help you out. Villains almost always believe that they're the good guy. They believe that even though they're murdering someone or they're doing whatever, they usually believe that they're on the side of right. Not always. Hans Gruber, as I showed you earlier, he knows he's a thief, and he's fine with it. So there are exceptions to this, but a lot of villains, they think they're doing the right thing. Of course, the most iconic villain of Darth Vader, what is he trying to do? He's not trying to be a bad guy and murder people. He's trying to restore order to the galaxy, right? Villains are always formidable. If you can easily squash a villain, they're not a real villain. They're just an obstacle, right? There's someone who is going to give the hero a real run for their money, a real competition. It's going to be a fight to the last breath, right? If they're not formidable, they're probably not interesting. And they don't necessarily have to be formidable in a way that is like hard to defeat necessarily. It might be easy to defeat. You know, they wound up defeating the Wicked Witch of the West with a bucket of water, but they didn't know that until that moment. So she seemed very formidable until, oh, it's just water takes her out. Oh, we got that. Let's see what else. The occasional points of kindness, right? So if a villain does a nice thing every once in a while, then it makes it to where we're like, oh, but we really like this person, you know? So like, it gives us that conflict there of like, are we rooting for them? Do we hate them? You know, what's going on there? Again, any of these you could have a villain without any of these particular, but these are things that in general work for villains. Almost always a villain is willing to lie or manipulate people in order to get what they want. So, you know, examples of that, of them taking advantage of people, outright lying to people, that kind of thing, just to remind us, hey, these are villains here. And a disregard for the sacred. So often villains will, you know, depending on the rating of the movie, a villain will like kill people and not really feel that bad about it. Or they might steal from people, or they might, you know, do anything that our hero would find like super not okay, and like generally people would find not okay, and the villain is like, I'm willing to do this for my cause, because they believe in their cause so much that they either don't mind, they have total disregard for this, or it's worth it to them to break that convention. Villain's got to be 3-dimensional. If your villain is just a bad guy with nothing else going on, we're probably not going to care. It's probably going to be a little bit more of an obstacle than a villain. And if we don't care about the villain at all, then the stakes go down just a little bit. And just to piggyback off that, we want to identify something in them, right? So in the TV show She-Ra and the Princess of Power, the evil villain is Hordak, and Hordak's whole thing is he's been stranded on this planet away from the people that the group that he wants to be accepted by. So he's going to just take over this planet in order to and so when they come back, that he will be like rewarded as like, hey, you know, we abandoned you and you wound up doing this thing. And we can identify with that of like, oh, we want to be part of a group. So what is it about your villain that is something that your audience can identify with? Okie doke. So let's talk about TV versus film. So all of the things that I've talked about are absolutely translatable to TV, even though I used all film examples. The main difference between TV and film is that it goes longer, right? So Walter White from Breaking Bad has all the character. He's an anti-hero, but the same kind of character arcs as a hero would have. He starts out one way and he changes, and then he keeps changing. And every season, it's like he has a different need that winds up changing, a different external want. The lie that he believes mainly is the same one, but it morphs, and he believes that that he deserves money, that he deserves to be known, that he deserves to be considered one of the greatest scientists, chemists of all time, that kind of thing, right? It's the same thing. If there was a Breaking Bad movie, we would see Walter White start out in the beginning as he did, and by the end we would see him, we'd see him become this great meth dealer, meth maker, and then wind up, going on hard times, getting people killed, getting all kinds of trouble, and then he'd be back to, by the end, he'd make the big sacrifice to give his act of contrition, and then he would, at the end, 2 hours. We'd see the whole thing in 2 hours. It wouldn't be as satisfying if you're a fan of Breaking Bad TV show because it happens over 5 seasons, but it's the same thing. It's just elongated out. So what TV gives us is that ability to go into the nuanced little details, right? Oftentimes, you will have a different main villain for every season. So Dexter was a quintessential example of this. Every season of Dexter is typified by a different villain that is the antithesis of the character, that helps the character grow as they combat this villain throughout the whole story. Veronica Mars, another great example. Like every season, there's a different big major case that she's trying to solve. Who got murdered, how they got murdered, how she's gonna find out, find justice for the person who got murdered. So there's individual cases for every episode that reveal things and little mini villains, but then there's an overall, like, who did it, what's the goal, that kind of thing. And same with Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, right? She starts out just wanting to be a housewife, and then she winds up wanting to be a comedian, and then now she's a female in a man's world trying to do comedy in the 60s. Like every season is a longer version of the film. So if you're writing TV, in your pilot, it's both a full story and it's, basically like a little part of what you would be writing if you'd be writing the movie version of this character. Again, we could go into a lot of little nuanced details with all that, but that's the basic crux of it. So a hero in a TV show, villain in a TV show, like all the attributes, what makes them engaging, 100% transfers to TV as well as film. And so that's it for the moment. I would love any and all questions that you have. So feel free to unmute your mics and or come on here. I'm going to get away from this screen sharing for a moment and get back to here. So what questions do you have that we can talk about? I see Raja first. Raja, what's up, bud?
Yeah. So the difference between a villain and an obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
So are there any rules of thumb that you can, like, let's say I'm developing a character, I was like, I have this idea for Tamatoa in Moana.
Yeah.
Right? In that process, are there any rules of thumb that I can go to be like, you know what, I love this guy, but I think he works better as an obstacle rather than a villain?
Yeah. So Tamatoa specifically, like, the idea is that, if you haven't seen Moana, the everything's messed up because the heart of Nefidi was taken. And then he winds up, Tamatoa has the heart, right? And he has the thing. And so the reason why Tamatoa is an obstacle is because all they need him for is to fight him, get the heart, and get out of there. Right? So if Tamatoa was the villain of Moana, then he would have been the one who had started the whole thing. He would have been the one that actually stole it, not Maui, right? And he'd be the one that at the very end was still holding on to it right next to and working with Nefidi to try and stop Moana. And then you slaying or defeating Tamatoa and getting that heart right at the end would be the thing that saves the whole movie, right? But instead what happens is we meet Tamatoa. I think there's a reference to him for like a second earlier in the film, but then we meet him, right? We get the thing, and then he's gone. We don't think about him again. That's an obstacle, something that we just overcame and moved on. Whereas
Gotcha.
the villain is going to be recurring and part of the whole reason for the movie existing. In the
Gotcha. There it is. Thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Other questions?
I have a question.
What's up, Rex?
It's not necessarily fleshed out, so bear with me, but when you are writing, do you start with your story or do you start with like well thought out characters and let them go?
It's a great question. Every writer has their own way of doing it. So in an interview with John Hughes, he talked about that he would get the premise of his idea before he did anything else, right? So he would have what if a bunch of different types of high school archetypes were all forced to be in a day-long detention together? How would that work, right? And so he started with that and then went into, the different, writing out the different characters, right? Sometimes you start with a character and then you build the story around that. And then sometimes it all kind of hits you at once of like, okay, I've got this bunny, she wants to be a cop, and there's this world, and like it just kind of hits you there. It really doesn't matter from a writer's standpoint which way you kind of your entry point is into your writing. But what you need to know is that whatever your character is, that is the story. So if your character is an insecure man-child who needs to grow up, then the story is going to be about how, what are the external circumstances that lead to him growing up, right? If your story is about some 20-something and she wants to find love more than anything else because she thinks she's incomplete if she doesn't have a relationship, then the story is going to be about how she finds out that she can be enough without the relationship, and that will probably help her find the relationship, right? So start wherever you want to start, and then just know that whatever you change here will also change here. Does that speak to your question? I may have gotten lost in my words there for a little bit.
No, that's great. And I do have one more.
Yeah, go for it.
Do you have any suggestions in terms of like short-term exercises you can do to like strengthen characters, like watch things and?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would watch. So whatever, if you want to write a TV show, I would watch TV shows and just based on the pilots, and then make yourself like write the main character or one of the main characters, and then bullet point what is it about this character that I learned from this episode that makes me like them, that makes me intrigued, that makes me want to follow them into other episodes. If you're writing a movie, same thing. Watch the movie and go, what was the arc? How did the character change from the beginning to the end? What was satisfying about that or not? And that's the great thing about art is you can learn a lot from watching good or bad art, right? So if you watch a bad movie, you're like, what was missing here that, potentially could have made me actually care about this character? Something like that. So a great example to me is the movie The Rock, 1996, Sean Connery and Nick Cage. The bad guys in The Rock, they actually had a really good cause. Their thing is that there's the veterans and people who've served in the military in this country were treated poorly and not given what they needed, and so they're gonna hold the country hostage, and you've got to get out prisoners of war, and you're gonna help veterans and all this stuff. So like we can agree with them, but then they're just defeated at the end, and that's that. And I always thought, if I could rewrite The Rock, which is a weird want to have, but I would make it to where Nick Cage, his character, had a father who was in the military and died or was dying because they neglected his health care. And then by the end, like, even though they defeat Ed Harris, that Nick Cage is struggling with it because, this guy actually wants to help the same kind of people like Nick Cage's dad, and how does he, deal with it? And that to me would tie it more together. They didn't do that. It's an action movie, whatever, but that would be a little more satisfying to me, or something like that. So what is it? I watch a movie and go, what's missing here that could be there? Yeah, always look to other people's art. As I believe it was Jim Rohn who said, success leaves clues, right? So if you watch The Godfather and you want to write a movie that feels like The Godfather, watch The Godfather and notate it, like what it deconstructed. Excellent questions. Others? What's up, Akello?
Hey, well, I have a question, kind of a question, but I just want to get your insight. I've watched films and I immediately had no connection to the heroes, and I didn't really care whether they died or lived.
Sure.
And sometimes I don't even finish watching the film because I feel
Been
like
there.
no emotional investment. from your opinion, how did they miss that? How did the writers miss that?
Well, it's one of two things, right? It's either they didn't miss that with a different audience, they just missed it with you, right? Because not like I don't relate to every movie out there. You don't really, you know, not every movie's made for everyone. So it's possible it's that, or it's possible that they just missed it totally and no one relates to the character, right? Oftentimes what I see in movies and TV when they miss that mark is because they're focused so much on the external story that they're missing the internal story.
Yeah. Right? I mean, I find myself like trying to want to like them in every way possible, just almost making up stories about them so that I feel invested in it. And I was just like, how did they miss that? Because it's so central. And I think it made it really clear how central that is.
And the truth is that, you know, we're not talking about novels here. We're talking about Hollywood. And so potentially whatever movie you're talking about, the screenwriter might have knocked it out of the park. And then through the process of rewrites and directors and producers, it could have just gotten watered down to where they missed the crucial thing that made the thing important in the first place. And that I've heard way too many stories of that in this town.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, this was a great script. Terrible movie.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We got time for a few more. Any other questions? I'm happy
to. I've got a question or comment.
Hit me, John.
I tend to like movies, for lack of a better term, that are more like art movies, or they're critically acclaimed movies as opposed to action movies that
like Academy Award-winning type movies.
Yeah, even Academy Award stuff has gotten pretty mainstream lately. But
okay,
I guess I've been thinking about some of the ones that I like, and they do tend to, when you get down to it, follow all the character arc sort of things. But I guess my comment is I feel a lot of times when I read the screenwriting books and whatnot, they're like how to write the next Die Hard, or how to write the next Planes, Trains, and Automobiles or something.
Sure.
Are there any kind of like I say, arty movies that you particularly like? That
give an example of a movie that you like that you're talking about, because arty could mean a lot of different things.
Yeah, well, nobody, I'm guarantee you, has seen it. The movie that I've liked the best in the last few years is one called Columbus. It's set in Columbus, Indiana, and it was sort of a darling at Sundance. I mean, it's but it's the story begins, and we have two main characters of a 19-year-old girl and probably like a 40-something-year-old man. John Cho plays the man, and Haley Lou Richardson is the girl. And Columbus, Indiana is a real place where it's sort of a mecca for modernist architecture for some strange reason. It's got all these great buildings here.
Okay.
Cho's dad's an architect in town, has a stroke, so Cho has to fly from Korea to attend to him. Haley Lou Richardson's a 19-year-old with a drug addict mom who his dream is to go to architecture school.
Great.
So her character,
she's got that external want.
She's got that, yeah.
Yeah.
But she and Cho sort of, the whole movie is them walking around Columbus, Indiana, looking at these buildings, talking about, his horrible relationship with his dad, her relationship with her mom, who's holding her back, and that sort of thing.
Okay.
Do you find, I guess maybe a question I could pose is, do you find movies, again, like arty or Academy Award winning, not necessarily popular films, conform to these sort of templates?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's basically it.
Gotcha. So yeah, I would say so here's a movie that I love. If you haven't seen it, Coffee and Cigarettes. It's Jim Jarmusch film.
Right. I have seen it.
Not at all. They're very different kind of movie than any example that I've used, anything that we're talking about, right? It's just like any other piece of art. You are allowed to go off formula anytime you want in order to make the thing that you want to make. The quote, and I think I said this in both my previous ones, so it might as well be appropriate to keep it going 3 in a row. Learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist, right? So there's this kind of standard structure, the variations of it, but there's, 3 acts, hero's journey, these kinds of different things. Learn the hell out of that. And then if you want to break it, you'll know what you're breaking, you know how to break it. here's the thing, as a creator, there are times where something will just hit me and I go, this doesn't make any sense why it would work, but I know it would work. And, you know, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But as a creator, if you've got that passion, like, I want to write a story about a guy and he sits in a room alone, but I know it's going to be compelling, like, I just know it's going to work, then write it. Then don't worry about it, just write it. And maybe it will. Maybe it'll be the exception for the rule that winds up knocking out of the park. But if you're just kind of like, I kind of want to write a story and I want to write it in this vein, but I'm not really sure, I would say stick with the things that you know work. And then once you've done that, go, okay, do I want to change anything about this to make it more arty or whatever that means, make it more like other films. But yeah, you're absolutely allowed to break the mold if you want to. Just know that you're probably going to find a much smaller audience, and that's super, you know, I know independent filmmakers who, they don't give a damn if more than 10 people see their movie. They're making their movie for them and their friends, and they're good with it. Right? I think that about that many people saw my first web series, you know, and that's part of it. Like, it's fine. Like, make what you gotta make.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.